Today, I am going to discuss or begin discussing Chapter 7 from the book In Love with the World by Mingyur Rinpoche. So Mingyur Rinpoche is starting out on his wandering 4-year retreat, and he has left his monastery, and he is now contemplating, in this case, Milarepa, who was a wandering yogi, the most famous wandering yogi in Tibetan Buddhism. So to review Milarepa's story here, that Milarepa was born into a wealthy family where they had a lot of land. They were farmers, and I'm sure they also had livestock like yaks. And when Milarepa was young, his father died. And there was an aunt and uncle in the area that literally took over the property from his mother. And his mother was powerless to stop it. So his mother, his sister, and Milarepa became servants of this aunt and uncle. And his mother then encouraged him, as he became older, to take revenge, to right this wrong that was done. So he left home and he studied black magic. And he was able to, through black magic, cause hailstorms. And there is more than one hailstorm that is talked about in relation to Milarepa. In this case, the most important one was so heavy that it caused the house that his aunt and uncle were living in to collapse. And Milarepa caused this hailstorm during a wedding celebration. And the collapse of the house ended up killing 35 people. It did not kill his aunt and uncle, on the other hand. So his mother and he were still in the same position they were before. But now Milarepa has some regret because he realizes that he has accumulated the karma of killing 35 people. His mother, on the other hand, rejoices at this action and praises him. Well, Milarepa starts looking for a teacher, a Buddhist teacher. He is serious now. He does not want to, when he dies, go to a hell realm. And he finds Marpa. Marpa had studied earlier in India with great Indian masters. He had made a total of 3 trips to India, and I believe he had spent a total of 17 years in India with great teachers, studying and particularly practicing. So Milarepa came to an excellent teacher. The thing is that Marpa also knew Milarepa's karma. I'm sure Milarepa told him what he had done, but Marpa, because he was highly realized, knew the best way to purify this karma. And as a result of this, he puts Marpa through all kinds of austerities and doing all kinds of things that really put Milarepa to the limits of his endurance. But he does practice in retreat under extremely difficult conditions and eventually attains realization. And he spent the rest of his life a wandering yogi with basically no possessions, just going from one area to another to another. One of the stories about him was that he was practicing alone in a cave. And he is frequently, by the way, in Thangka paintings depicted as green, because he would exist certain times of the year on basically nettles, boiled nettles. He did not have a lot of food to eat. But this one story is that a group of robbers came across his cave and went in to see what they could take from him. And they went through everything of his, couldn't find anything, and then they left. And a little while later, one of the robbers came back and gave him something because he felt so bad about Milarepa's condition and his lack of having anything. So he brings this up, and he has some lessons about this. He said, first of all, that Milarepa had very few people that he had contact with during his life, and he had very few disciples, but he did have some. But after he died, that the stories and legends about Milarepa touched people from that time to the present time as inspired people. In his words, it even widened the gates of possibilities for Mingyur Rinpoche. The second point of this story is that his main student is Gampopa, and Gampopa's main student is the first Karmapa. And it is Gampopa that, you might say, put together the Kagyu lineage in its present form, which is a combination of monasticism, combination of the Mahamudra teachings, and then the 7 points of mind training teachings from the Kadampa tradition. And there are a lot of other Kadampa teachings, which are Mahayana teachings. So Milarepa was responsible for training Gampopa, who really, you could say, was the creator of the Kagyu lineage. A third is that there were many, in Mingyur Rinpoche's words, many incarnations during Milarepa's life. That there were times of passion and violence, abundance and poverty, misery and mercy. And to quote Mingyur Rinpoche, death and rebirth characterize everyone's story. That's on page 54. So the point that he is making here is that as we go through our daily lives, we are constantly experiencing death and rebirth. We have different roles that we play. And we change as we go through our lives. And so we have many different incarnations. He also talks about him wearing many different hats. This is Mingyur Rinpoche wearing many different hats. Again, referring to the idea of the different roles that he and all of us have. At one point, we were school children. At another point, we became adults. And then many, if not most of us, married and had a partner. And and we worked at some point in time and had a job, and we're taxpayers and property owners and car owners, and on and on and on and on. Each one of these is just a little different than the others. He says here, we all transform, and that's an important word, transform, through love and loss, relationships, work, tragedy, kindness, and so forth. And he says that it's being afraid of death that keeps us holding on and fighting impermanence. That afraid of, in this case, he uses the term masks. These different identities that we have for ourselves, these different roles, different hats. Take your pick, call it whatever you like. So to kind of sum up this point about many incarnations, if we know there is a bigger reality which we can live in, one with more space, room to move around in, and so forth, we can, quote, become less afraid of our own authenticity. The fourth point that he brings up in relationship to Milarepa is faith, trust, and confidence. That Milarepa went on a search without knowing where he was headed. He had faith and trust in his own ability to find his way. He accepted the uncertainty, which allowed for this confidence to mature. And I can tell you from my own experience, this brought up a memory for me, and that was that I had asked Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche if I could do a 3-year retreat, that he was just in the final stages of getting the retreat center built and so forth. And he accepted. He said I could attend. And then this was 2.5, 3 years between that asking to be able to do the retreat and the retreat actually happening. I was talking about the 3-year retreat and leading up to it, and a number of times I would think that, well, when I finish the retreat, I will have no money, I will have no job, I'll have my property, of course, to live in, but maybe I should prepare better, save up more money, and yada, 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 yada. And basically, it all came down to, well, do you trust yourself? Do you have confidence in being able to, when the retreat is over with, you might say, land on my feet, or at least get on my feet soon after the retreat? And as it turned out, it wasn't a problem. But if I just thought about it and gave in to fear, I never would have done the retreat. So those were the points he made about Milarepa. Next thing, he discusses the 6 realms and the wheel of life. And also he talks about karma at this point. Now, we have studied a book by the Dalai Lama in this book club that was on the wheel of life. And we've studied Traleg Rinpoche's book on karma. So a lot of this is going to be somewhat familiar to you. Now, the difference is that he is using the 6 realms not in terms of places that you can be reborn in and will be reborn in after you die, but he is talking about it in this life. about how we go through different emotions during our day and our week and our lifetime. And the emotion that we are, you might say, being controlled by puts us in a particular realm. He says that his father, Choki Nyima, taught this way. And I've mentioned this before. Chogyam Trungpa taught it this way too. He did not ignore the fact that when you die, you will be reborn in one of the 6 realms, but he felt that it was important to understand at both levels, the level of this life and the level of what happens after you die. So he says that this is Mingyur Rinpoche says that we study the painting to learn about the fluidity of mind. Quote, the wheel signifies circularity, perpetuation, suffering. We also study it because it gives us a chance to wake up, to relate to old patterns in new ways, to realize that we can change. And that's an important word. So he uses his own experience. He says the Gaia train station and the train felt like a hell realm. He had this feeling of uncertainty, of being vulnerable, of fear, being alone. The taxi didn't show up. He was in the animal realm. He didn't use reason. He just reacted. Reacting to the sound of the whistle of the train, again, was the animal realm, that he reacted to the sound before investigating. And he even thought that it could be a terrorist attack. Craving for protection was like a thirst in his heart, he said. The full God realm represents being ignored, pride, where he felt that he shouldn't be ignored. He was too important to be ignored. And he goes through these feelings in some of the chapters that we're going to go through later on. This is a recurring theme, how we go through these different realms in our daily life, and we go through them quickly. And it is mindfulness that allows us to be aware of what's going on and perhaps catch ourselves every once in a while. So these realms in samsara, the 6 realms of the wheel of life, are considered afflictive because our attachment to them narrows our experience, that the emotions are not static. He says, instead of saying, this is who I am, we might reconsider, and as his words, think, this is how I sometimes feel. To kind of go through these 6 realms very briefly, the lowest realm is the hell realm, and it is anger that causes us to be reborn there, fear, feeling that you could be attacked or harmed, and so forth. And another realm is the hungry ghost realm, and that is the realm of feeling greed, a feeling of not having enough, always wanting more, of being hungry, thirsty. No matter how much you have, you want more, and so forth. The animal realm, as he just described, is reacting without thinking, just reacting. The Tibetan word for animal means one who goes hunched over. And that is what is kind of being talked about here, about reacting. It's not looking up, not seeing anything beyond what you are doing right in the present. And you're not even seeing that clearly. You're concentrating so much on what's going on that you don't see anything else. I saw a video on YouTube, which was very interesting. It was two groups of people together that were dressed in two different colors. Let's just say black or white and red. And they each had a ball, and you were supposed to count how many times the white team passed the ball to other members of their team. And there was no court, there was no basketball hoop, there was no competition of the other team trying to take the ball away. It was just that they were, the red team was passing a ball back and forth, and the white team, and they were intermixed. And so you watch the white team and you watch the ball that the white team uses. And in the middle of all of this, a person in a gorilla costume walks into the middle of this group, looks at the camera and does something funny and then walks off. And then at the end of it, the question is, did you see the gorilla? I did not see the gorilla the first time. This is the animal realm. We're so concentrated on one particular thing, we miss everything else. The human realm is the realm of poverty mentality. We're not to the point of the greed of the hungry ghost, but we never have enough. We always want more. We're never secure enough. We're never protected enough. We have this anxiety. And so there's a reason why ads are the way they are, that are trying to get us to buy something. They kind of prey on our insecurity and our needs to feel more secure, better liked, or whatever it is. The jealous God realm is the realm of jealousy. You are actually in a pretty good place, but you feel jealous of other people. You feel other people have a better deal than you do. And then the full God realm, which he talked about here, is pride, feeling that you are better than other people or deserve better than you are getting. You're not treated good enough, and so forth. So as I said here, he talks about that these afflictive emotions narrow our experience, and it's better to look at them and think, this is how I'm feeling at the present time. This is not solid. This is not who I am. There is what is called monkey mind, and he talks about this. And this is that our ordinary mind, which jumps around from thought to thought to thought to emotion and so forth, and it's constantly active. It doesn't sit still. It's like a monkey in the zoo. And that is what we're experiencing with these different realms and the different emotions that take us to these realms. So to escape the realm that we are in, we have to let the emotion die. If the emotion doesn't die, then then we remain in that realm. We have to protect ourselves, we feel, from death and from that part of ourselves dying, and that just prolongs the experience. We can hold on to things for 10, 20, 30 years. We can take things to our grave, in fact. So, and this is where the gap comes in. And that is, the gap is this space between the end of one and the beginning of another. That the recognition of this end of whatever it is, it's an emotion, a thought, it could be the breath, the end of the out-breath before the in-breath begins is a gap. And when you start recognizing that, you're getting a glimpse of emptiness. So he says this gap is always present, and that some moments are more conducive to recognizing it than others. And so he said that when your out-breath ends, when the in-breath ends and before the out-breath begins is this gap. That's the way he talks about it. Certainly there's going to be a gap the other way too, when the out-breath ends before the in-breath begins, but it's easy to recognize the gap between the in-breath and the out-breath. And he felt that when he was on the train, it was a bit like a gap. Quote on page 60, "I am in the bardo of becoming, I thought, traversing different realms." So he wasn't staying in any of these realms for very long. He just kept going from one to another to another. So basically, to sum up this chapter, he's talking about his old life dying and the new one that has not yet been born. So now the next chapter is chapter 8, the Varanasi rail station. And this is beginning on page 61. This station will be his home for a while. He has planned it this way, that this will be where he will stay for a few days to ease into his retreat. He starts out by going over the steps that he had taken that brought him to this point. Each step was a new beginning, and the new beginning led to a new beginning. So each beginning was the death of the old beginning. And the new is uncomfortable. Just like all the previous new situations that he was in from leaving the monastery. He was really not comfortable from that point on to getting to the station at Varanasi. So he had wanted to make the world his home, he says, to not get hooked by sights, sounds, and smells, to not get into attachment and aversion, to be what is happening and let it go. So then he talks about how ordinary beings view home, security, familiarity, shelter from an uncontrollable world. And he admits that he is homesick to a degree. So he then reflects on one of his teachers, Lama Rinpoche, who said, quote, "We are all homesick, longing for our true home." That's on page 63. And in this case, the true home is our ultimate mind, our Buddha nature. the absolute. That we're all homesick for that. We just don't know it. That everything else is running in circles in the world of confusion. And that actually points back to the wheel of life, because it is circular, it is a wheel. And it describes very well this circling in the world of confusion, running in circles. So he discusses next the pointlessness of samsaric ambition and achievements. That samsara is full of desire, unfulfilled desire, disappointment, recrimination, dissatisfaction, uncertainty, just to mention a few. We keep thinking, us beings in samsara, that our desires can be fulfilled, that we can become satisfied, that we can somehow or another create certainty or permanence, and so forth. That people should respect us. So he says he's got some questions here that he is kind of seeking answers for on this retreat. And one of them is, here they are, some of them at least. Why doesn't the train station feel safe? What makes me uptight and easy? What holds me back? And he has a pretty good answer for all of this. And this is for all of us too, not just him. And that is to look at your mind and watch your thoughts. So in watching his thoughts, he finds that there have been lots of challenges the past 12 hours, that he was in his words, the bardo of change. On page 65, here is a quote. The true meaning of in between has nothing to do with physical references, but is about the anxiety of dislocation, of having left behind a mental zone of comfort and not yet having arrived anywhere that restores that ease. So he mentions that he has been uncomfortable and anxious and so forth since he left his room on the second floor of the building that he lived in. So he's walking around the Varanasi railway station now, and he contemplates a few things here. He said here on page 66, when we move past the convention or the convenience of language in categories, every second manifests the bardo of becoming. That because of impermanence, things are always becoming, changing, transforming, dying, and so forth. And he then comments about this, that without faith in our capacity for regeneration, we can't make the most of dying every day. That the future is not predetermined. That finally, we aren't fated to circle in samsara forever. Another way of putting this is that freedom lies in the present moment. And if we avoid giving in to habitual patterns, giving into our habitual emotions, that is where freedom lies. Freedom does not lie in the past. It can't be changed. And freedom does not live in the future or lie in the future because it hasn't happened yet. That the only place freedom resides is in the present moment. And it is through exercising our freedom that we are able to avoid circling in samsara forever. So he's talking about actually possibility, the present being full of possibility. So then he thinks, am I going in a new direction? And he follows this thought, and his answer is that, well, actually, I have been going in this direction my whole life. That what I'm doing now is deepening this process that I've been involved in for years. He said, I'm adding wood to the fire, but the fire was burning for years. Then he talks about a student of his who was unsuccessful during most of his life. And then he showed up one time to Mingyur Rinpoche, and he was a successful businessman. And Mingyur Rinpoche asked, well, what happened? And the student said, well, I finally realized that you can't succeed until you're willing to fail. That it takes courage. And so then Mingyur Rinpoche asks himself, am I ready to fail? What would failure look like for me? And basically all he could come up with was going back to the monastery. He couldn't think of any other possibility of failure. And then he talks about a story of again, another student of his who was a woman married to an alcoholic. And her husband did sober up, and then she left him, which is rather ironic that the woman could live with an alcoholic but could not live with a recovering alcoholic. But what she said was that I realized I could no longer feel superior to him. And so the relationship fell apart because that's what it was based on. She did say this, that I'm working on, quote, accepting that I am worthy of being loved by someone other than a drunk, which is actually a pretty deep realization. And so he says he is working on something too. He's working on seeing all the ways that he has been treated as special. Looking at his dependence on others for protection and caretaking. So now he contemplates the reaction others will have to his absence and his retreat. He had left a letter behind, and now it is that time of the morning that his attendant will come into his room, see the letter, read it, and then let everybody know that he is gone. And in the letter, which he quoted a significant part of, that he says he's going to do a wandering retreat with, quote, just an unswerving commitment to the path of awakening. So he sits down on the stone floor of the railway station in an area that is set aside for people that are waiting for a train, and they could be waiting for a few days even for a train. And he says he's in meditation posture, quote, the perfect image of a disciplined monk, unquote. He says that a lot of people are looking at him. He feels naked, and he hasn't foreseen this feeling. Again, a good quote here is, what caught me off guard was a sense of embarrassment, of having no place to hide, of being stared at, of feeling devoured by my inhibitions, end quote. And he said that this alienation from himself soon became alienation from others. And he literally used this word here, that now he was with this group of indigent people, poor people might be a better word for it, but I think he used indigent. And that he was being stared at by, quote, lunatics. He did not see them as being normal. They were lunatics. At this point, I thought, you know, this is a good contemplation for us to apply to ourselves in the present political situation in the United States. That we become alienated from ourselves, and then we start seeing the other people. If you are a Trump supporter, it's everybody else that's the lunatics. And if you're not a Trump supporter, it's the Trump supporters that are the lunatics. But it's really good to look deeply at ourselves and our own reaction and where we are emotionally. So finally, he finishes up the chapter with doing another scan like he did on the train, starting with a body scan, starting with his head, going down to his feet for 5 minutes, then relaxing. Then he did a scan with body sensations, starting at his head, noticing the sensations, seeing how does it register, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, then rest. Doing some insight meditation, which is observing, do the sensations change? Does your reaction to the sensation change over time? So this helped him, in his words, experience the continuity of change. That fixed mind equals anxiety and stress, whereas in between every breath, every thought, gaps exist that are free of conception and free of memory. And he says that most people don't notice this because of habit. So then, to conclude this chapter, he talks that he has realized that it is his pride that was stuck, that was causing his sense of embarrassment. Again, he said there were rats among the people that he referred to as lunatics. People smelled bad. The station smelled bad. And then he realized the people are staring at him because he was too well dressed. I think he used the word, which is an kind of American phrase, that he must have looked like he was slumming it to everybody else. And then it ends by him having his conversation with a man with a family that was sitting next to him on the floor.